When most people hear the word Yajna, they imagine a sacred fire, offerings, and priests chanting mantras. But the Vedas speak of something far more profound. In the Purusha Sukta, one of the most mysterious hymns of the Rig Veda, creation itself begins with a yajna. The gods perform sacrifice through sacrifice itself. From that primordial offering emerges the universe. And from that very act arise first dharmas. Dharma is the foundational principle that sustains our reality. In the Vedic worldview, Yajna is not merely a ritual performed within the cosmos. Yajna is the process through which cosmos comes into the being. Pranamas. I am Pawan Kumar Sharma. Welcome to Vrukodara Speaks. Through this video, let us understand what the concept of Yajna truly is. The famous lines from the Purusha Sukta truly hooked me to learn more about this philosophy. Yajnena yajnamayajanta devaha tani dharmani pratamanyāsan, meaning, by yajna, the devas performed yajna. These were first dharma. The wording here is deliberately paradoxical. It does not say the devas worshipped an outside deity through sacrifice. Instead, it says the devas performed sacrifice using sacrifice itself. The object of the ritual and the instrument used are both yajna. This is one of the reasons this specific verse fascinated later Vedantic commentators across traditions, including Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhvacharya. This brings us to a fundamental question. What is actually being sacrificed here? The initial verses of the Purusha Suktam establish that the entire cosmos emerges from the sacrifice of a cosmic persona, the Virat Purusha. The text says, Yat Purusham Yadadaha Katithabja Kalpayan Mukham Kimasya Ko Baho Kavuro Padavuchete Brahmanosya Mukhamasit Baho Rajanya Krutaha Uro tadasya yadvaishyah padbhyagam shodro ajāyata chandrama manaso jātah chaksho suryo ajāyata mukhadindraschagnischa pranad vagyurajāyata. The text explicitly traces creation to the source. The moon emerges from the mind, the sun from the eyes, Indra and Agni from the mouth, the directions from the ears, and the human society from the limbs. Notice how the universe is not created from external dead matter. The universe is the transformed body of the Purusha. This is radically different from the popular Western theological concept of creation ex nihilo, or creating out of nothing. Here, creation happens entirely through self-offering. The great commentator Sayanacharya pushes this insight even further. He interprets Yajna not merely as a human ceremony, but as the active cosmic process through which manifestation occurs. Think of it this way. The Purusha is the absolute totality of existence. The Devas are the cosmic functions operating within the totality. Therefore, creation happens through a primordial act of self-transformation, and that self-transformation is called Yajna. Thus, Yajna is not a ceremony that simply imitates creation. Creation itself is Yajna. This is a profound reversal of our modern understanding. Most people think the physical world was created first, and later on, humans invented sacrifice. The Vedic vision flips this completely. The world exists because sacrifice happened first. Yajna existed before everything else. But why does this text say, these were the first dharma? This line deserves our special attention. Tani dharmani pratamanyāsan. This is indeed one of the earliest and most famous uses of the word dharma in our history. But here, dharma does not mean religion, morality, ethics, or social duty. Its meaning is closer to that which upholds, a sustaining principle or a foundational order. The verse is essentially telling us that the primordial sacrifice established the fundamental laws that govern reality. Dharma is a cosmic concept that connects directly to Rita, the Vedic principle of universal harmony. It is the literal architecture of reality. Now that brings us back to one more question. Why did the Devas sacrifice themselves? This is where things become interesting. Many modern writers quickly summarize the hymn by saying the gods sacrificed themselves. While partly true, this requires nuance. The hymn explicitly says that the Purusha is offered. However, since the Purusha contains everything and Devas are manifestations within the Purusha, it means that in a metaphysical sense, the sacrificer and the sacrificed, the sacrificee, all are aspects of the exact same reality. This exact insight later becomes explicitly clear in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 24. Brahmarpanam Brahma Havir Brahma Guno Brahmana Hutam Brahmaiva Tena Kantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. Sri Krishna explains that Brahman is the offering, Brahman is the deity, Brahman is the fire, and the Brahman is the sacrificer. The Gita is beautifully extending the exact logic already present in the Purusha Sukta. If the Vedic rishis saw Yajna as the very architecture of existence, they were not alone in sensing that sacrifice lay at the heart of reality. Across the world, civilizations separated by oceans and millennia arrived at remarkably similar intuitions. Kings, priests, warriors, and sages all asked the same question. What sustains the cosmos? Why does order exist instead of chaos? And again, the answer they found was sacrifice. Yet, the meaning of the sacrifice differed dramatically from culture to culture. First, sacrifice as self-transformation. Far to the north, among the Viking people of Scandinavia, emerged the Norse religion. Their chief deity was Odin, the god of wisdom, poetry, kingship, and hidden knowledge. Unlike a distant ruler seated safely upon a throne, Odin was a relentless seeker who willingly endured immense suffering in the pursuit of truth. The passage that explains Odin's ultimate sacrifice is found in the poetic Edda, specifically within the ancient poem titled Havamah, which translates to Sayings of the High One. Stanzas 138 and 139 describe Odin hanging himself upon the world tree Yggdrasil in a profound act of shamanic initiation. I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear dedicated to Odin, myself to myself, on the tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. No bread did they give me, nor a drink from a horn. Downwards I peered, I looked upon the runes. Screaming I took them, then I fell back from there. This is one of the closest global parallels to our Vedic idea. Odin is simultaneously sacrificer, the sacrificee, and the recipient of the offering. He offers himself to himself. Just as the Purusha contains all existence, Odin's sacrifice transcends the simple idea of offering something external. However, an important distinction lies in the goal. While the Purusha's sacrifice produces the physical cosmos, Odin's sacrifice produces absolute wisdom. One is an act of cosmic manifestation, the other is an act of spiritual attainment. Yet, both imply the same profound truth. The highest sacrifice is the self-offering. Second, sacrifice as the restoration of cosmic order. Long before the rise of monotheistic religions, ancient Persia was shaped by the teachings of Zarathustra, known in Greek as Zoroaster. His religion, Zoroastrianism, centered on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. The key idea here is that the universe is an active battleground between two primal forces, Asha, which represents the truth and order, and Druj, which represents falsehood and disorder. This immediately reminds me of the Vedic concept of Rita. But there is a crucial difference. Rita is the cosmic order already securely woven into reality. Asha, on the other hand, is a cosmic order constantly under attack. The central Zoroastrian ritual is called as the Yajna or Yasna. The word itself is linguistically related to the Sanskrit word Yajna. Both derived from the ancient Proto-Indo-Iranian root Yaj, showcasing one of the strongest historical and cultural links we can find. In the Zoroastrian tradition, ritual is not merely passive worship, it is active participation in the maintenance of Asha. Their sacred Ahunavar prayer is regarded as a primordial utterance through which cosmic order is established, and reciting it strengthens truth against forces of chaos. We could summarize the contrast this way. In the Vedic world, sacrifice sustains an already moving cosmic rhythm. In the Zoroastrian world, sacrifice joins an ongoing cosmic struggle. Third, sacrifice as cosmic debt. Across the ocean, in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, the mighty Aztec civilization flourished. Their religious worldview was intensely cosmic. They believed the gods themselves had to sacrifice their own lives to create the present world. Because the sun moved across the sky, divine beings had previously sacrificed themselves. Thus, humanity inherited a profound sacred obligation. The Nahua concept of Nishtlavastlistli, often translated simply as debt payment, lay at the absolute heart of Aztec ritual. For the Aztecs, human sacrifice was seen as a terrifying necessity to preserve existence. They feared that if humanity ceased offering life force, the sun would weaken and total cosmic collapse would follow. When we contrast this with the Vedic view, the comparison becomes deeply interesting. The Vedic tradition certainly recognizes reciprocity. The Devas nourish humans and the humans nourish Devas. Yet the underlying tone is entirely different. The Vedic cosmos is not portrayed as a fragile machine on the verge of breaking down tomorrow without an offering. Instead, sacrifice is a joyful participation in a harmony that is already sustained through mutual giving. To phrase it simply, the Aztec sacrifice emerged from a fear that the cosmos might cease. The Vedic sacrifice emerged from a recognition that the cosmos is already beautifully sustained through mutual offering. So, the Norse saw self-sacrifice as a path to supreme wisdom. The Persians saw the ritual as a defense of truth against chaos. Aztecs saw offerings as an urgent repayment of a cosmic debt. Yet, the Vedic rishis proposed something even more fundamental. They saw sacrifice not merely as a mean of obtaining wisdom, preserving order, or preventing catastrophe. They saw sacrifice as the very pattern through which existence naturally unfolds. Before there were temples, before there were priests, before there were even words, there was Yajna. The universe itself was born through an act of self-offering. Every ritual performed thereafter became a living remembrance of that primordial reality. So, why should humans perform Yajna? The common modern understanding is that we perform rituals to please or appease the gods. The Vedic understanding is far subtler. Humans perform Yajna because reality itself is structurally built as Yajna. The ritual simply mirrors the cosmic event. A fire sacrifice is a physical reenactment of the original act through which order emerged from chaos. The Vedic ritual is not a transactional request sent to heaven. It is an active participation in the cosmic process that sustains our existence. This becomes undeniable in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna states, Sahayagna prajaha srishtva purovacha prajapatihi anena prasavishyadvam isha vosthishtakaamadak. Having created the beings together with Yajna, Prajapati said, "By this shall you prosper." The logic is elegant. Creation begins with Yajna. The cosmic forces and human beings exchange energy through Yajna. Cosmic harmony is maintained strictly through Yajna. Refusing to participate breaks this vital cycle. This is not transactional religion. It is a deep cosmic reciprocity. One of the most beautiful insights hidden in Purusha Sukta is this: existence is fundamentally sacrificial. Nothing in nature exists without giving itself away. The sun continuously burns itself to provide light. The earth constantly gives of itself to produce food. Plants die to sustain animals. Animals offer their lives to sustain other animals. Parents sacrifice their effort for children, and teachers sacrifice their time for students. Our entire civilization exists today because past generations offered themselves for the future. Through these verses, our rishis are showing us that Yajna is not merely one single activity within nature. Yajna is the pattern of nature itself. The hymn places Yajna at the absolute beginning of the creation, not because the gods needed a ritual, because self-offering is the definitive principle through which the one consciously becomes the many. If the Purusha Sukta presents Yajna as the architecture of reality itself, the later ritual traditions sought to answer a deeply practical question. How does a human being actually participate in that cosmic process? The answer emerges through the Shrauta traditions and later on through the Agamas. The Vedic ritualists did not view a Yajna as merely lighting a campfire and tossing materials into it. To them, the ritual was a highly structured, precise technology. It involved sacred geometry, consecrated spaces, spoken mantras, focused intention, and physical offerings. The fire was certainly critical, but it was only one component within a much larger system. In fact, the ritual theorists of the Vedic tradition placed extraordinary emphasis on a concept called Dravya Tyaga, the total relinquishment of ownership over the offering. The moment an item is given, it must completely cease to belong to the person sacrificing it. In this understanding, the true essence of Yajna is not that physical destruction of an object in the flames, but its intentional dedication toward a higher purpose. This is why later ritual traditions explicitly define Yajna using the phrase Devatodeshena Dravya Tyagaha, the renunciation of a material offering for the sake of a cosmic principle or a devata. The true transformation occurs not merely inside the physical fire pit, but in the psychological relationship between the sacrificer, the offering, and the sacred cosmic order being invoked. The architecture of the ritual arena itself presents this principle perfectly. The Vedic Yagnashala was never treated as just an ordinary room or a generic venue. Every single dimension had to be measured with absolute precision. Every altar had to be constructed according to the strict geometrical rules. Every mathematical texts, known as Sulabha Sutras, were written for the sole purpose of masterfully designing these altars geometrically. To the Vedic mind, the altar was not simply built within the universe, but it was built as a miniature model of the universe. The fire corresponded directly to the sun. The altar corresponded directly to the earth. The physical ritual space perfectly mirrored the metaphysical cosmos. By entering this phase, the human practitioner became an active participant in the original primordial act through which order emerged from chaos. In a very real sense, the Yagnashala functioned as a gateway between the visible and the invisible worlds, a carefully engineered environment where human action could be perfectly aligned with the universal principles. Later on, the Agamas extended this exact same idea even further. What the Vedic ritual arena achieved temporarily, the Hindu temple sought to achieve permanently. A temple was never conceived as a mere community gathering hall for worshippers. Through the process of consecration, sacred geometry, mantra installation, and ritual design, the temple became a living, permanent sacred structure. Many Agamic traditions describe the temple simultaneously as three things: a living body, a cosmic mandala, and an energetic yantra. It is a beautifully designed instrument through which divine presence is invoked, anchored, and sustained. This specific technical context is incredibly important today because many traditional rules regarding sacred spaces are loudly debated without any reference to the very ritual systems that originally created them. A prime example of this is the restriction surrounding menstruation. Modern discussions almost always reduce this complex issue to a simplistic emotional conflict between blind tradition and social equality. However, if we look back at the original ritual framework, these restrictions did not exist in a vacuum. They were part of a vast interconnected ecosystem of daily observances. A traditional Vedic household was expected to maintain rigorous daily rituals, keep sacred fires burning continuously, make precise offerings, perform recitations, and maintain strict personal disciplines around all year. Ritual purity was simply one technical component within this massive operational system. The most crucial distinction to understand is this: the classical traditions generally treated these conditions as temporary ritual states, never as a moral defects, spiritual sins, or signs of human inferiority. A practitioner could become temporarily unfit to step into a highly charged ritual environment for dozens of different reasons: a birth in the family, a death in the family, specific bodily processes, or sudden illnesses. These conditions were cyclic in nature and completely temporary. The temporary state was restricted from entering a technical environment such as Yagnashala, not the individual as a human being. Yet, this raises an incredibly vital question for our modern world. What happens when the larger ritual framework completely disappears? The vast majority of modern households no longer maintain Agnihotra. They no longer keep a living consecrated sacred fire in their houses. Daily Vedic rituals are entirely absent. Nityakarmas are rarely observed. Most of us, the home shrine has transitioned from a highly active, high energy ritual center into a quiet, beautiful gallery of framed images. And yet, in some of these very homes, a single isolated restriction survives with absolute aggressive intensity. That is, the restriction around menstruation. At this point, an intellectually honest question emerges. If a specific rule originally functioned as a small cog inside a complete ritual ecosystem, what happens to the rule when the entire ecosystem is dead and gone? Is enforcing that isolated practice still serving the original scientific purpose for which it was established? Or has it become completely detached from the Yajna-centered worldview that once gave it meaning and logic? Asking this is not an act of rejecting our tradition. It is an act of understanding our tradition deeply enough to distinguish between its core living principles or its hollow structural remnants. The Vedic worldview constantly teaches us a profound lesson. Form always derives its meaning strictly from purpose. The altar matters only because of the sacrifice performed upon it. The sacred space matters only because of the living rituals it sustains. The technical rule matters only because of the cosmic principle it is designed to protect. When the actual practice of yajna disappears, but the restrictive rules remain, dharma itself invites us to look closely and ask a difficult question. Are we truly preserving the brilliant spirit of our ancestors, or are we merely clinging to its shadow? And perhaps this brings us right back to deepest and most beautiful insight of yajna itself. Yajna was never merely about blindly preserving rigid forms. It was about preserving the living, breathing relationship between form and purpose, between action and meaning, and ultimately between the human being and the cosmic order or Devata. But to truly understand how we lost the spirits of this tradition, we have to look past the social rules and return to the physical medium itself. We have to look at the fire. Before we examine the modern scientific research on Agnihotra, it is worth asking a more fundamental question. Why fire? Why did nearly every ancient civilization across the globe place fire at the absolute center of its sacred life? Anthropologists regard the controlled use of fire as one of the definitive turning points in human evolution. fire completely transformed human existence. It provided life-saving warmth in hostile climates. It offered protection from nocturnal predators. It enabled cooking, which fundamentally altered human nutrition and brain development. By extending waking hours far beyond sunset, it became the natural anchor around which the earliest communities gathered. In many ways, fire was humanity's first great technology. But unlike most tools we invented, fire possessed a unique, almost sentient character. A stone tool remains passive in the hand of its owner. A fire, however, cannot be possessed or owned in the same way. It must be actively tended. It must be fed, it must be maintained. To keep it alive, you must participate with it. Perhaps this is the exact reason fire became such a powerful universal symbol across ancient cultures. It was simultaneously hyper-practical and deeply mysterious. It transformed everything it touched, converting the dense and visible into the invisible. Solid offerings instantly became heat, light, fragrance, rising smoke, and clean ash. For ancient people, fire naturally became a living bridge between worlds. The Vedic tradition elevated this universal human intuition into one of the most sophisticated ritual systems in history. In our tradition, Agni was never viewed as merely a physical flame or chemical combustion. He was described as the messenger between realms, the cosmic carrier of offerings, the visible presence through which invisible exchanges became possible. This brings us to an intriguing question. Were the ancient ritualists observing something empirical about the fire that modern science is only beginning to explore? While it would be very inaccurate and absolutely unscientific to claim that modern laboratories have fully proven the metaphysical dimensions of Yajna, a growing body of research has documented several fascinating environmental effects associated with Agnihotra and related fire rituals. These findings are best understood not as a final religious verdict, but as converging lines of evidence. One area of repeated objective observation concerns air quality and microbial load. Multiple independent studies have reported measurable decreases in airborne bacterial and fungal populations following Agnihotra rituals. A landmark study published in Environmental Science and Indian Journal 2008 documented significant reductions in airborne microbial counts after Agnihotra was performed. More recently, findings reported in Alochana Chakra Journal 2026 similarly observed a sharp decrease in bacterial and fungal colonies within enclosed environments post-ritual. Researchers suggest that the unique combination of intense heat, specific combustion products from the medicinal herbs, and the resulting aerosols generated during the ritual work together to sanitize the environment, ambient air. While the precise chemical mechanisms remain under investigation, the consistency of these observations across different decades and studies makes them incredibly difficult to ignore. Our second area of immense interest involves atmospheric chemistry. Recent studies published in the Indian Journal of Traditional Knowledge 2026 have reported that Agnihotra generated aerosols contained a rich variety of bioactive compounds capable of actively interacting with harmful atmospheric pollutants. Under controlled experimental conditions, researchers observed measurable reductions in the concentration of toxic gases such as carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide. Crucially, the proposed scientific mechanism is not simply that these pollutants are being burned away by heat. Rather, the dense aerosols produced by the combustion of organic materials like clarified butter and specific plant matter appear to participate in complex chemical interactions that neutralize air pollutants. The 2026 studies identified specific compounds within the smoke such as phenolics, organic acids, and other volatile constituents that actively contribute to these air purifying effects. Of course, much work remains to be done. Controlled scientific studies are still limited, and broader global replication is absolutely necessary before definitive conclusions can be drawn. Yet, the large pattern that is deeply compelling. The Vedic ritualists never described Agni as a mere metaphor of static world. They treated fire as an active, living participant in maintaining a clean equilibrium between the human world and the natural ecosystem. Today, modern science, operating from a completely different empirical framework, has begun documenting measurable environmental shifts associated with these exact practices. Whether these lab findings ultimately explain the deep, fulfilled ancient traditions or merely reveal one physical dimension of them remains an open question. But it suggests something profoundly worth considering. Perhaps the enduring reverence for fire across human civilization was never just an act of primitive superstition. Perhaps our ancestors recognized through precise observing accumulated across hundreds of generations that the fire was capable of transforming environments in ways they could deeply perceive even if they did not possess the modern chemical nomenclature to fully explain it. If Yajna is the ultimate principle of transformation, then fire is the most visible universal teacher. Everything offered into it emerges as something else, and that profound insight likely captivated human beings long before the very first Vedic hymn was ever seen. After exploring the cosmic vision of the Purusha Sukta, the precise ritual architecture of the Štauta tradition, and even the modern environmental observations associated with Agnihotra, we inevitably arrive at a final piercing question. What was all of this ultimately for? Was Yajna merely an external ritual, a mechanical ceremony, an ancient technology to clear the air, or a transactional means of obtaining material blessings? The answer offered by the Vedic tradition goes far deeper. One of the most profound clues to this mystery appears in the Chamakam, the celebrated companion of the Namakam of Sri Rudram in the Yajurveda. Among its many fluid rhythmic verses appears a truly remarkable sequence. Ajujjnena kalpatam, prano yajnena kalpatam, apano yajnena kalpatam, jano yajnena kalpatam, chakshut yajnena kalpatagum, shrotram yajnena kalpatam, mano yajnena kalpatam, vak yajnena kalpatam, atma yajnena kalpatam, yajno yajnena kalpatam. Meaning, may life be perfected through yajna. May my vital breath be perfected through Yajna. May my eyes and ears be perfected through Yajna. May my mind and speech be perfected through Yajna. May myself, the Atma, be perfected through Yajna. At a first glance, the Chamakam appears to be nothing more than a long shopping list of human desires. But a closer, more intellectual examination reveals something extraordinary. The recurring anchor word here is not a passive request for possession, it is kalpatam. Kalpatam translates to may it become fit, may it become capable, may it be brought into absolute perfect alignment. The mantra is not asking the external fire to magically hand over physical gifts. It is asking that every single layer of human existence, from our physical body to psychological breath, to our sensory perception, from our psychological mind to our deepest spiritual center, be brought into one harmonious order through which the fundamental principle of Yajna can exist. At this moment, Yajna completely ceases to be an isolated event. It becomes a continuous process of a lifelong refinement. The external fire pit was never the final destination. It was just a teacher. The material offering placed into the flames was always a symbolic mirror of a much deeper internal transformation taking place within the human consciousness. Just as the pure ghee is offered into the Agni, our individual selfishness is meant to be offered into conscious discipline. Just as the raw material is cleanly consumed and transformed into a bright flame, the individual ego is meant to be completely dissolved and elevated through purposeful actions. Just as the physical ritual seeks to engineer harmony between the human home and the natural ecosystem, human life itself is meant to become an ongoing walking act of alignment. This is the exact evolutionary junction where the early ritual visions of the Vedas seamlessly converges with the deep non-dualistic insights of Uttaramimamsa, the school we know today as Vedanta. The earlier ritual traditions asked one question: how should the yajna be performed? The later philosophical tradition answered: who is the ultimate performing the yajna? Through this shift, the external ritual is masterfully internalized. The brick altar becomes the human heart. The physical offering becomes personal ego. The raging fire becomes the light of pure, unadulterated awareness. The baseline transformation remains exactly the same. What changes is the profound level at which it is realized. The Bhagavad Gita expresses this exact spiritual evolution beautifully. Sri Krishna describes multiple diverse forms of yajna, explaining that it does not always require a physical fire pit. He speaks of the yajna of the breath, the yajna of acquiring knowledge, the yajna of mental discipline, and the yajna of absolute self-mastery. The core principle remains entirely unchanged. What changes is your maturity in understanding it. Seen in this light, the definitive message of yajna is not that you should occasionally sit before a sacred fire once a year. It is that you must live your life, learn to live your life, your entire existence this way ritually. Every single meaningful action in human life involves offering something of yourself. Every great achievement demands sacrifice. Every genuine relationship requires continuous giving. Every act of true learning requires the humble surrender of your own ignorance, and every single stage of personal growth requires you to willingly relinquish an older, lesser version of yourself to the flames. Life itself is sustained strictly through countless invisible acts of mutual offering. Our ancient rishis recognized this universal pattern and gave it a singular, timeless name. They called it the yajna. Perhaps that is the deepest and most urgent lessons of our entire tradition. Yajna was never merely an act confined to a sacred space or restricted by social gatekeepers. Yajna is the profound realization that existence itself cannot survive without the act of giving. The Purusha offered himself at the beginning of time, and this magnificent universe emerged out of it. The Devas continuously participate in their cosmic functions, and universal order is maintained. Human beings consciously perform yajna, and they align their daily lives with dharma. Ultimately, the true seeker discovers that the highest, most potent yajna cannot be performed upon an altar of bricks, nor can its restrictions be dictated by those who have abandoned the practice. It can only be performed within. For when your life, your breath, your senses, your mind, and your soul are entirely offered to something higher than your ego, when they are completely aligned with dharma, then and only then the true fire of awareness is lit. And as the Chamakam triumphantly declares to the universe, Atma Yajnena Kalpatam, may the self itself become perfected through the sacrifice. Thank you for walking through this deep dive with me. This exploration of form versus spirit is something I find vital for our times. And I want to know where you stand. How do you practice the spirit of yajna in your own daily life? Or how do you view the shift from the physical fire to internal awareness? Let us continue this interesting discussions in the comments. Until next time. Remember, Dharmo yeva hato hanti, dharmo rakshita rakshitah.